Nicholas Sterling was a name that commanded both respect and fear in the corporate world. The ruthless billionaire CEO of Sterling Enterprises, he had built his empire from the ground up, turning a small investment firm into one of the most powerful corporations in the country. But while his business thrived, his personal life was a different story altogether. Nicholas had no patience for weakness. His employees walked on eggshells around him, fearing his sharp tongue and even sharper business instincts. To him, efficiency was everything, and anyone who failed to meet his high expectations was immediately replaced. He had no time for emotions, and no tolerance for mistakes. He lived in a world of numbers, deals, and deadlines, and that world had no place for distractions like love. But what no one knew was that beneath the cold exterior, Nicholas was a man carrying deep scars from his past. His father had abandoned him when he was just a child, leaving his mother to struggle alone. She had worked multiple jobs just to put food on the table, sacrificing everything to give Nicholas a better life. But poverty had stolen her health, and by the time Nicholas made his first million, it was too late to save her. That loss had changed him. He had vowed never to be weak again, never to be in a position where life could take away something he loved. He built walls around his heart, convinced that money was the only thing that could protect him from pain. And so, he chased power, success, and wealth, leaving no room for emotions. Even his relationships were strategic. He was engaged to Vanessa Carter, a socialite from a wealthy family, a woman who understood the importance of status and control. To the world, they were the perfect power couple, wealthy, attractive, and influential. But behind closed doors, their relationship was cold and calculated, more of a business partnership than a romance. Nicholas thought he had everything figured out. He had money, power, and a future mapped out without any surprises. But fate had other plans. One late evening, after an exhausting day of meetings, Nicholas decided to inspect the company headquarters. He had a habit of doing surprise late-night walkthroughs, partly to ensure his employees were keeping up with his high standards, and partly because sleep never came easy for him. As he walked through the pristine marble hallways, he noticed something unusual. The janitorial staff had finished their shift hours ago, yet the women's restroom light was still on. A faint sound caught his attention. Soft, rhythmic breathing, almost as if someone was sleeping. Frowning, Nicholas pushed the restroom door open. He stepped inside, scanning the room, when his eyes landed on a cleaning cart parked next to one of the stalls. And then he saw it. A pair of small, worn-out sneakers peeking out from under the stall door. His sharp eyes narrowed. Someone was inside, sleeping, in his building. Displeased, he reached forward and pushed the stall door open slightly. What he saw next made him freeze. A young woman was curled up inside, her arms wrapped around herself for warmth. She wore the company's janitorial uniform, but it was clear that the fabric was faded and slightly oversized, as if it had been handed down too many times. Her dark brown hair fell messily over her face, and her breathing was deep, her body utterly exhausted. Nicholas stared at her. Something about the sight unnerved him. Who was she? And why did seeing her like this make his chest tighten? At that moment, he didn't know that this one encounter would change his entire world. The woman sleeping in the stall had no idea that her life was about to change. Her name was Emily Carter, and life had been nothing but a series of struggles for her. Unlike the wealthy socialites and executives who worked in the towering Sterling Enterprises building, Emily had spent her entire existence fighting to survive. She had once been a promising student, full of dreams and ambition. But reality had crushed those dreams early on. Her mother had fallen ill when Emily was still in high school, and without any support, Emily had been forced to drop out to take care of her. She had worked every job imaginable, waitressing, cashiering, cleaning, just to afford medicine and rent. And when her mother passed away, Emily had been left with nothing. No home, no education, no future. Now she spent her nights scrubbing floors in an office building where people made more money in an hour than she earned in a month. Still, she never complained. She wasn't ashamed of her job. At least it was honest work. At least she wasn't begging on the streets. At least she had a tiny, run-down apartment to go home to. Though sometimes, she was so exhausted after her shifts that she didn't even make it back there. Like tonight. She had been working back-to-back shifts, covering for another cleaning lady who had quit suddenly. The long hours had taken a toll on her body, and after finishing the restroom cleaning, she had just meant to sit down for a few minutes. But exhaustion had claimed her, and she had dozed off in the stall, too tired to move. And that's how she had ended up face-to-face with the most powerful man in the building. A voice, low, sharp, and filled with authority, cut through her dreams. "Wake up." Emily's eyes snapped open, and her heart nearly stopped. Towering above her was a man she recognized immediately. Nicholas Sterling, the CEO himself. The man whose face had graced magazine covers, whose name was spoken in both fear and admiration. She had seen him before, in brief glimpses, walking through the building with his team of executives, his expensive suits and cold demeanor setting him apart from everyone else. And now, he was staring at her, his piercing blue eyes filled with unreadable emotions. Emily's breath hitched. She was fired. She just knew it. She scrambled to her feet, nearly tripping over herself in panic. I'm sorry," she stammered. I didn't mean to sleep here. I was just—" Nicholas held up a hand, silencing her. His gaze swept over her appearance, her worn-out uniform, her tired eyes, the dark circles under them. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Then, instead of yelling or firing her on the spot, he did something that completely shocked her. "When was the last time you ate?" Emily blinked. "Excuse me?" she whispered, confused. Nicholas's expression didn't change. "When was the last time you ate?" he repeated, his voice slow and deliberate. Emily's throat went dry. She had expected anger, not concern. But there was something intense in his gaze, something that made her stomach twist uncomfortably. She hesitated, then reluctantly answered. "Yesterday morning," she admitted. A muscle ticked in Nicholas's jaw. Emily regretted telling the truth. Why did she say that? Why did she let him see her weakness? She had spent years hiding her struggles, refusing to let anyone pity her. But now, under the weight of his gaze, she felt exposed. Nicholas didn't speak for a moment. Then, in a tone that left no room for argument, he said, "Follow me." Emily's eyes widened. What? Where?" Nicholas turned, already walking toward the door. "You're coming with me." And just like that, Emily's life took a turn she never saw coming. It was an encounter that would change the course of both their lives forever. One that neither Nicholas nor Emily could have ever predicted. The CEO of Sterling Enterprises, a man used to power, control, and perfection, found himself face to face with a woman who had been invisible to the world, at least, to his world. Emily wasn't one of those people he encountered daily. She wasn't part of the elite social circle or the world of wealth and privilege that Nicholas was accustomed to. She wasn't a power player or someone with business acumen. Emily was just a cleaning lady, and to Nicholas, that meant she was ordinary, someone to be ignored, someone to simply pass by without a second glance. But as he stood there staring at her, his mind was racing. He had just witnessed something that shook his core. She was sleeping on the toilet floor. His initial reaction was one of disbelief. How could anyone be in such a state? How could someone who worked in the same building as him, who probably passed him by every day without him ever noticing, end up in such a pitiful condition? And yet, there she was, exhausted, vulnerable, lost in a moment of unconsciousness, in the most uncomfortable of places. She had looked so small, so fragile. Yet there was a strength in the way she had curled up in that tiny, cramped space, as though the world outside had given her no choice but to retreat. Nicholas didn't know why, but something about that moment stirred something in him. Maybe it was her vulnerability. Maybe it was the undeniable humanity in her that was so unlike the polished, emotionless professionals he dealt with daily. Maybe it was the realization that despite all his money, his status, and his power, he had never been forced to experience the pain and hardship she seemed to face daily. But whatever it was, It was enough to make him hesitate. He didn't just see a woman in that restroom. He saw someone far more complex. Someone whose life was more than just a series of fleeting moments. When she had finally woken up, her eyes had locked with his, and for a brief, unsettling second, it felt as though the world had stopped spinning. Her face flushed with embarrassment, but there was also a subtle strength in her eyes. A strength that Nicholas hadn't expected to see in someone like her. He had braced himself for an apology, a stammered excuse, something to make the moment feel more comfortable. But Emily didn't offer that. She didn't back down or lower her gaze. Instead, she had met his gaze head-on, as if to say she wasn't going to let him pity her. That was when Nicholas knew he had misjudged her. She was no longer just the cleaning lady in the building. She was a person with a story. A story that, for some reason, Nicholas felt compelled to know. Still, he kept his emotions in check. This was business, after all. He didn't have time for unnecessary drama or distractions. He had a company to run, an empire to build. Feelings weren't part of the equation. But as he looked at her, there was something about Emily that made him reconsider his priorities. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. There was a fire in her eyes, a silent resilience that spoke volumes. He knew, deep down, that this encounter was going to linger. He had seen a lot of things in his life. Deals, betrayals, luxury, and greed. But this was different. This was raw, and it was impossible to ignore. Even as she stammered apologies, making an effort to leave, Nicholas could feel something inside him pulling him towards her. He wanted to understand her, to know what had brought her here. What had made her so different from everyone else he had ever met? "Are you all right?" he asked before he could stop himself. The question hung in the air, unexpected, uncalculated. He was never the type to ask personal questions, especially not to someone in her position. Emily paused, her back stiffening at the sound of his voice. She seemed to weigh his words carefully before replying, her voice soft but steady. "I'm fine. Thank you," she said, trying to regain some sense of control. But something told Nicholas that she wasn't fine. Not really. Her words didn't match the way her eyes avoided his gaze, nor did they match the way her hands trembled as she gathered her cleaning supplies. There was a crack in her carefully maintained facade, and Nicholas couldn't help but notice it. That was when he made the decision. Without thinking, without a plan, he spoke the words that would forever alter the course of both their lives. "Come with me," he said, his voice unexpectedly firm. Emily froze, the suddenness of the command catching her off guard. "What?" she whispered. Nicholas didn't wait for her to answer. He didn't want to hear another protest, another excuse. He had already seen enough. "Follow me," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. And just like that, the game had changed. Emily's life, which had been nothing but a fight for survival, was about to collide with a world she had never even dreamed of. But she didn't know that yet. All she knew was that she was standing in front of the man who owned the building and controlled everything, and he was asking her to follow him. It was the beginning of something they would both never forget. The moment Emily followed Nicholas out of the restroom, her mind was racing. Every step she took behind him felt like a world away from the reality she had just experienced. What had just happened? How did she end up being the object of attention for a man like Nicholas? She had never been in a position like this before. It wasn't that she hadn't met wealthy men, but none had ever shown her real attention. They passed by her like she was invisible, like the rest of the world. But Nicholas... He had stopped. He hadn't looked at her like she was invisible. They walked through the hallway, and Emily's heart was pounding in her chest. She didn't know where they were going, but she was too afraid to ask. It felt like she was walking through a dream, one that she could wake up from at any moment. She had seen the luxurious life of the rich from a distance. She knew how they lived. She had cleaned up after them, overheard their conversations, and witnessed their daily indulgences. But to be in the presence of someone like Nicholas, someone who had everything, was like living in a different world entirely. Nicholas led her to his office, a sprawling space filled with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He turned around to face her, and Emily could feel her anxiety mounting. What was he going to say to her? Why had he called her here? Before she could speak, he broke the silence. "I need to talk to you," Nicholas said, his voice calm but serious. Emily swallowed, not sure if she was ready for whatever was coming next. She knew she had to be cautious. Being in a room with someone like him meant she had to play her cards right, but she didn't even know what cards she had. Nicholas motioned for her to sit down, and Emily did so, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her nerves visible. She didn't know why she was there or what was going to happen next, but she had a sinking feeling in her gut. "I've been thinking," Nicholas continued, his voice softer now. "I don't think you belong here, cleaning this office. You deserve more than this." Emily blinked. She hadn't expected those words. What did he mean by that? She opened her mouth to speak, but he raised a hand to stop her. "I'm offering you a second chance," he said. "Not in this building, though. I want you to work for me. I want you to join me in a way that will change your life, give you the future you deserve." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Was this real? Was he offering her a chance to be something more? A second chance to escape the life she had known for so long? She nodded, unsure of how to process the words. It sounded too good to be true. But Nicholas wasn't finished. "There's one condition," he added, his gaze serious. Emily froze. A condition? She stared at him, waiting for him to elaborate. What kind of condition could there possibly be? "I want you to stop hiding," Nicholas said, his voice firm but gentle. "I want you to take a chance on me and yourself. No more running away from opportunities. No more pretending to be someone you're not." Emily's heart was racing. Was he asking her to change who she was? To leave everything she knew behind and step into a world that she didn't belong to? "I know this is a lot to ask," Nicholas continued, his gaze unwavering. "But if you agree to take this chance, I can guarantee you a future beyond your wildest dreams. You'll never have to struggle again." The weight of his words settled heavily on Emily's shoulders. Could she trust him? Could she take this leap of faith? But there was something in his eyes, a sincerity that Emily hadn't seen before, a sincerity that made her want to believe him. She looked down at her hands, trying to gather her thoughts. This wasn't just about taking a new job or making more money. This was about transforming her life completely. Was she ready to leave everything she knew behind? She didn't have an answer right away. She had to think this through. "I need time," Emily finally said, her voice shaky but firm. "I need to think about it." Nicholas nodded, his expression softening. He understood. "Take all the time you need," he said, "but know that this opportunity won't wait forever. If you want it, you'll have to decide soon." The silence between them was thick with tension. Emily's mind was spinning, her thoughts racing. How could she possibly say no? But at the same time, how could she take this chance? She had never been in a position where she had a real choice. She had always lived with the bare minimum, never daring to dream of anything better. Nicholas stepped closer to her, his presence filling the room. "I'm not offering you this because I feel sorry for you," he said, his voice low and intense. "I'm offering it because I believe in you. I believe you have the strength to succeed in this world, in my world." Emily could feel his sincerity in every word, and for the first time in her life, she felt like someone believed in her. She stood up, a sense of resolve filling her. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "I'll take the chance." Nicholas smiled. "Good," he said, his voice full of approval. "Then we'll start right away." And just like that, Emily's life had changed forever. She had a second chance. But it wasn't going to be easy. She had no idea what the future held, but she was ready to take it on. She was ready to step into a world that she had always thought was out of her reach. The next chapter of her life was just beginning, and she had no idea where it would take her. But one thing was certain. It wouldn't be a life like the one she had left behind. As Emily settled into her new role at the company, something became apparent to her, a truth that she hadn't expected. Despite the luxury, the power, and the wealth that surrounded her, Nicholas wasn't the man she had thought him to be. It was easy to admire him from a distance, the confident CEO, the well-dressed millionaire, the successful businessman who had it all. But now, working beside him every day, Emily began to notice the small signs of struggle beneath his polished exterior. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Emily was wrapping up her tasks when she found herself alone in the company's lounge. The city skyline stretched out before her through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the lights twinkling like stars. She sighed, the weight of the day pressing heavily on her shoulders. It was during these quiet moments, when everything slowed down, that the truth about Nicholas became harder to ignore. She had seen the way he held himself together in meetings, how he never let his emotions slip, even when things weren't going as planned. But lately, Emily had started to notice the subtle shifts in his behavior. The way his smile sometimes didn't reach his eyes, or how he would zone out during casual conversations, lost in his thoughts. The first time Emily saw the cracks in his armor was when they were working late together. She had just finished organizing his papers when he walked into the lounge, a glass of whiskey in hand. The sight of him startled her. He looked weary, his usual self-assuredness gone. "Long day?" Emily asked softly, not wanting to intrude, but also concerned. Nicholas didn't answer right away. He stared out the window for a moment, his posture slumped as though the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders. For the first time, Emily saw him as just a man, not the unshakable CEO. "Yes," he replied quietly, his voice lower than usual. "Sometimes I wonder if it's all worth it." Emily's heart ached at the vulnerability in his tone. She had always admired his strength, but now she saw the heavy burden he carried. Behind the wealth and success, there was a man who was struggling with something far deeper than anyone knew. For the first time since she'd met him, Emily didn't know how to respond. She had always seen him as the picture of success, the kind of man who had it all figured out. But now, in this quiet moment, she realized that success didn't come without its costs. Some sacrifices came with being at the top, things no one could truly understand unless they had been in his shoes. Nicholas finally turned to her, his expression distant yet tinged with a hint of sadness. "I've lost more than people think," he said, his voice quiet. "I've spent so much of my life building this company, but in doing so, I've sacrificed everything else. My friends, my family, the people I love." Emily was taken aback. She had no idea that someone like him could feel so isolated. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because of success." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Success is a lonely road, Emily. You don't make it to the top without losing something important along the way. And sometimes, I wonder if it's worth it." The weight of his words hit her harder than she expected. She thought about all the times she had envied his lifestyle, the fancy cars, the designer clothes, the glamorous parties. But now, she saw that those things didn't matter as much to him. They were just distractions from the pain he carried inside. Nicholas took a long sip from his glass, his eyes never leaving the city below. "I lost my parents when I was young," he continued, his voice steady, but filled with an emotion Emily hadn't heard before. "I had no one to turn to, no one to guide me. I had to grow up fast, take control of everything myself." He looked at her then, his eyes dark with emotion. "And I thought that by building this empire I could fill the void, but it hasn't worked. It's never worked." Emily's heart sank as she listened. She hadn't known any of this about him. She had known about his business successes, but nothing about the man who had been through so much loss, so much pain. The Nicholas she saw every day was a man guarded behind walls, afraid to show weakness. She took a tentative step forward, feeling the tension between them shift. "I'm sorry," she said softly, unsure of what else to say. Nicholas smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's not your fault," he said, setting the glass down on the table. But sometimes, I don't know how to keep going. At that moment, something inside Emily shifted. The man who had once seemed so untouchable, so far removed from her reality, now seemed like just another human being with fears and vulnerabilities. He wasn't the godlike figure she had once imagined him to be. He was a man who was grieving, a man who had built his wealth in hopes of finding solace, but had found only emptiness. Emily didn't know what to say, but she couldn't ignore the connection that had formed between them, the quiet understanding, the shared pain. She had always tried to avoid getting too close to people, afraid that it would hurt too much. But now, she realized that maybe that was exactly what she needed to do. After a long silence, Nicholas spoke again, his voice quieter now. "I never thought I'd let anyone in. But for some reason, I feel like I can talk to you, Emily." The words took her by surprise. She had never expected to be the person he confided in. She had always seen herself as the maid, just another worker in the background. But in that moment, she realized she had become something more to him. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I don't know what to say, but I'm glad you're letting me in." Nicholas nodded, his gaze meeting hers for the first time with true appreciation. "I don't want to be alone anymore," he said, his voice barely audible. "But I don't know how to open up to anyone." Emily stepped closer, her heart pounding. For the first time in their relationship, the divide between them seemed to disappear. They weren't boss and employees anymore. They were two people, connected by their shared experiences and pain. It was a small moment, but it was a significant one. Emily could feel the weight of it settling on her chest. There was a fragility to Nicholas that no one could see, and yet she had seen it. She understood it. She knew that his wealth and success were just facades, masks he wore to hide the loneliness inside. Nicholas took a deep breath, as though he had just let go of something heavy. "Maybe we can help each other," he said, almost to himself. "Maybe that's why we're here." And Emily realized, in that moment, that their connection wasn't just about work or ambition. It was about healing. Both of them needed something that they hadn't been able to find alone. And maybe, just maybe, they could find it together. As the evening wore on, Emily stayed with him, not as his employee, but as someone who had become a part of his world, someone who saw him as more than just a billionaire. And for the first time, Nicholas didn't feel so alone. As the days passed after their emotional conversation, Emily's life at the company took on a new rhythm. The air between her and Nicholas had shifted, their connection deepening in ways neither of them had expected. Despite the walls that had once separated them, there was now a quiet understanding, an unspoken bond that seemed to grow with every passing moment. The line between employer and employee blurred, and what once felt like a professional relationship now carried the weight of something far more personal. However, despite their closeness, they had never really stepped into each other's worlds outside of the office. Nicholas was still the billionaire CEO, surrounded by a life of wealth, status, and high-profile events. Emily, on the other hand, was the humble maid, living a simple life with modest aspirations. She had never been part of that world of opulence, and she didn't know if she ever would be. One afternoon, as Emily was working through the usual tasks, the phone rang. It was the office line, and Emily answered it without thinking twice. She hadn't expected to hear Nicholas's voice on the other end. But there he was, his tone unusually serious. "Emily." Nicholas's voice was firm, but there was something soft about it too. "I need you to do something for me." She was slightly taken aback. She had gotten used to him giving her instructions, but this was different. There was a certain urgency in his words, something that told her this was more than just a typical work request. "Of course, Nicholas. What do you need?" "I need you to attend an event with me tonight. It's an important gala, and I don't want to go alone." His words were blunt, but there was an underlying vulnerability that made her pause. "Wait. What?" Emily was surprised. She had never been to a gala, much less a high-profile event with someone like Nicholas. "But why me?" she asked, feeling her nerves spike at the idea of stepping into such a glamorous world. Nicholas didn't immediately answer. Instead, there was a long pause, almost as if he was considering how to phrase his next words. "Because you're the only one who understands me," he said quietly, his voice softer than usual. "I've spent too much time around people who only care about what I can do for them. But you've never treated me like everyone else." The words hit her like a wave, sweeping away any doubts she had. She had never realized how much her presence, her genuine care for him, had affected him. She had always seen him as the powerful, untouchable CEO, but now she saw him as a man who needed someone to truly understand him. Someone who didn't see him just as a millionaire but as a person. Emily's heart raced. She had never imagined that a night like this could be something she would ever experience. A gala, the kind of event she had only seen in movies, filled with glittering lights, expensive dresses, and champagne flowing freely. The idea of stepping into that world felt like stepping into a different reality. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Emily admitted, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I don't belong in that world, Nicholas." Nicholas's reply came quickly, almost as though he had been waiting for her to voice her doubts. "You belong wherever you choose to be, Emily. Don't let anyone or anything make you feel otherwise." The confidence in his words made Emily pause. Could it be that simple? Could she just walk into a world that felt so far removed from her own, and not only survive but thrive? The evening of the gala arrived faster than she had anticipated. Emily was a bundle of nerves as she prepared herself for the night. She had never worn anything fancy, let alone a designer dress, and the thought of being under the scrutiny of the social elite made her stomach churn. But she had promised Nicholas that she would go, and part of her couldn't let him down. After all, he had made it clear that this wasn't just an invitation, it was a chance for her to be a part of his world. When she arrived at the venue, she was immediately struck by the contrast between the outside world and the extravagant building in front of her. The red carpet rolled out in front of the entrance, and the crowd of well-dressed people was enough to make her feel small. The flashing cameras, the laughter, the chatter. It was a world Emily had never dreamed she would be a part of. Nicholas, dressed in a sharp tuxedo, stood at the entrance, waiting for her. The moment he saw her, his face broke into a warm smile, one that made all of her anxieties melt away. It was as if she were the only person in the room who mattered to him. "You look beautiful," Nicholas said, his voice low and genuine as he offered her his arm. Emily could barely believe it. She, the maid, the quiet girl who had never been a part of this world, was now walking into the gala on the arm of one of the wealthiest men in the room. The atmosphere inside the venue was nothing like what Emily had imagined. It was even more glamorous than she had expected. Marble floors, golden chandeliers, and an atmosphere filled with sophistication and exclusivity. She felt out of place, like a fish out of water. But at the same time, there was something strangely comforting about being next to Nicholas. He moved through the crowd with ease, but his attention never strayed far from her. "Are you okay?" Nicholas asked quietly as they mingled, noticing the nervousness in her eyes. "I'm fine," Emily answered, though her voice betrayed her. "I just feel out of place here." Nicholas smiled, taking her hand gently. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you." His words, as simple as they were, meant everything. It was in that moment that Emily realized how much she had come to depend on him. His presence, his confidence, it gave her strength. She might not have belonged in this world, but with him by her side, maybe she could make it her own. As the evening wore on, Emily found herself increasingly drawn into the conversations and the glitz of the event. The wealth and power that had once seemed so foreign to her now felt less intimidating, less distant. It wasn't the people at the gala who mattered. It was the man standing next to her. Nicholas, the man who had seen her for who she truly was, the person who had invited her into his world and made her feel like she belonged. At one point they were separated by a crowd, and Emily found herself standing near the edge of the ballroom, watching the sea of people mingle and dance. It was then that it hit her. The world she had once believed was completely out of her reach wasn't as impenetrable as she had thought. It wasn't about the wealth or the status. It was about the connections, the genuine bonds people could form if they were willing to look beyond the surface. And then, as if sensing her thoughts, Nicholas appeared at her side again, his smile warm. "Are you ready to go?" he asked, his eyes searching hers for any sign of discomfort. Emily nodded. A sense of peace settled over her. She may not have belonged to this world, but with Nicholas, she had found a place where she was valued, a place where she could thrive. The night had been an unforgettable experience, not because of the opulence or the glamour, but because of the connection she had forged with Nicholas, a bond that transcended the differences in their worlds. As the days passed after the unforgettable gala, Emily found herself caught between the whirlwind of emotions that had come with her unexpected exposure to the world of wealth and power. Nicholas's presence had become more and more a constant in her life, and though she was still adjusting to the luxuries that seemed so foreign to her, there was a comfort in knowing that she wasn't navigating this new world alone. But despite the connection they shared, Emily couldn't ignore the fact that there was still a lot she didn't understand about Nicholas's life. The glitz and glamour of his high society existence weren't the only aspects that seemed foreign. There was also the intricate web of relationships and expectations that came with being a billionaire CEO. It wasn't long before Emily realized that, as much as she had become a part of his world, other people in it weren't too happy about the bond that was forming between them. Her first clue came when she overheard a conversation in the hallway. It was late one afternoon, and she had been working quietly when she heard the unmistakable sound of raised voices. Nicholas's voice was one of them, but it wasn't alone. A woman's voice, cold and demanding, echoed down the hallway. Emily couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Frustration, anger, and a sense of entitlement. She froze, instinctively stepping away from the door. She had heard enough to know that the woman on the other end of the conversation was not someone to be trifled with. But she didn't have long to ponder the situation before the door swung open, revealing Nicholas in the doorway, his face set in a tight expression of frustration. Behind him, standing with her arms crossed, was a tall woman with blonde hair and a look of disdain. Emily recognized her immediately. She was Isabella, the woman who had been introduced to her a few days earlier at the gala as Nicholas's fiancée. Isabella's presence had been a stark contrast to Emily's humble demeanor, and it hadn't taken long for Emily to realize that there was something more to Isabella's relationship with Nicholas than just a friendly acquaintance. Isabella had always appeared cold and distant toward Emily, but it was now clear that there was more to her hostility than simple aloofness. The tension in the room was palpable as Emily stood there, unsure of what to do. Nicholas, usually so calm and composed, was visibly on edge. Isabella's sharp gaze flicked between Nicholas and Emily, her lips curling into a sneer. "So this is the maid," she said, her tone dripping with contempt. "I've heard so much about you." Emily shifted uncomfortably, suddenly feeling very out of place. She had always known that her status as a maid would make her an outsider in Nicholas's world. But now, facing Isabella's scorn, it felt like a harsh reality. Nicholas's jaw tightened, and for a moment, he didn't respond. His gaze remained on Isabella, his eyes hardening. "Isabella, we need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm. "Not now," Isabella snapped, her gaze never leaving Emily. "You think you can just waltz into my life and take what's mine?" Her voice was rising now, an unmistakable edge of jealousy lacing every word. Emily took a step back, feeling the weight of the situation press in on her. She had never been one to seek out drama, and the last thing she wanted was to get caught in a fight between Nicholas and his fiancée. But Isabella wasn't finished. She took a step closer to Emily, her eyes narrowing as she looked her up and down. "You think you're special, don't you?" Isabella spat, her words laced with venom. "Do you think someone like him would fall for someone like you?" Emily's heart raced as Isabella's words struck deep. The jeering tone in her voice stung more than she cared to admit. She had never considered herself beautiful or glamorous. She was just a simple woman who had been doing her job. But to hear Isabella's words made her feel as if she didn't belong, as if she was an intruder in a world that had never been meant for her. Nicholas finally stepped forward, placing himself between Emily and Isabella. "Enough, Isabella," he said, his voice clipped with authority. "I'm not going to let you talk to her like that." But Isabella wasn't deterred. Her eyes flashed with rage as she looked up at Nicholas. "You're so blinded by this little thing that you've forgotten what we had?" Her voice cracked as she spat the words, clearly seething with jealousy. "I've been by your side for years, Nicholas, and you think this Maid is going to change everything?" Emily flinched at the venom in Isabella's words, but Nicholas's voice was calm as he turned to face her. "It's not about what we had, Isabella," he said, his words slow and deliberate. "It's about what's real. And what's real is that Emily is someone I trust, someone I've come to care about." Isabella let out a harsh laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Care about? Are you serious?" She took a step closer, her voice low and dangerous. "This isn't just some passing fancy, Nicholas. You're making a fool of yourself. If you think this Maid is worth throwing away everything we've built together, then I don't know what to say." Emily felt the weight of the conversation pressing on her chest. She wasn't used to confrontation, especially not on this scale. But there was a fire inside her now, a sense of defiance that she had never known. She wasn't going to let Isabella make her feel inferior anymore. She wasn't going to let anyone make her feel small. "I didn't ask for any of this," Emily said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "I'm just trying to do my job, and if Nicholas cares about me, then I don't need your approval." There was a moment of silence as the words hung in the air. Isabella's face twisted with rage, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath and turned to Nicholas, her eyes darkening with the promise of a future conversation. "We'll talk later," she said coldly, her words laced with finality. "This isn't over." And with that, Isabella turned and stormed out of the room, leaving the tension thick in the air. Nicholas stood there for a moment, watching her go, his expression unreadable. Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of relief that Isabella was gone. But she also felt something else, a lingering doubt. Was she truly just a passing distraction for Nicholas? Was there something deeper that she wasn't seeing? Nicholas finally turned to face Emily, his expression softening as he met her eyes. "I'm sorry about that," he said quietly. "You didn't deserve any of that." Emily just nodded, unsure of what to say. The whole situation had left her feeling shaken, but she also knew one thing. The world she was stepping into wasn't going to be easy. And now, with Isabella still in the picture, things were only going to get more complicated. After the dramatic confrontation with Isabella, things between Nicholas and Emily had become more complicated than ever. The tension was thick, and even though he had made it clear that he valued Emily, he couldn't deny that Isabella's words had planted a seed of doubt in his mind. He had always believed in his heart that his relationship with Isabella was more about shared history and expectations than actual love. But now, standing beside Emily, he began to question everything. Over the following days, he found himself grappling with emotions he had long buried. The weight of his family's expectations, the pressures of his career, and the image he had built for himself in the public eye were all starting to feel suffocating. He had always prided himself on being in control, but in this situation, he felt helpless. Emily, on the other hand, seemed to bring a sense of calm and authenticity to his life. Her quiet strength, her unwavering loyalty, and her ability to see beyond his wealth were qualities he had never encountered before. Yet, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that his life was a delicate balance, one that could crumble at any moment. His thoughts drifted back to the night he had first met Emily. She had been cleaning the bathroom of all places, and though he had never expected to find anyone like her in his life, she had unknowingly captured his attention. Her raw vulnerability, her sincerity, and her willingness to work hard for everything she had, these were qualities that made her stand out to him in a world where superficiality was the norm. But despite the undeniable connection they shared, there was still the lingering shadow of Isabella and the world he was supposed to belong to. It was a world that didn't accept the kind of love that was beginning to blossom between him and Emily. And so, Nicholas found himself at a crossroads. He couldn't deny that his heart had shifted in ways he never expected, but he also knew that if he were to be with Emily, he would be stepping into uncharted territory. His family, his friends, and his social circle would never understand. The world would never accept someone like Emily as his equal. Yet, as he stood by the window of his penthouse one evening, staring out at the city below, he found himself asking, why did any of that matter? Why should he care about what anyone else thought when what he felt for Emily was real? The answer came to him in an instant. It wasn't about the wealth, the status, or the expectations. It was about the truth. Emily had shown him a side of life he had long since forgotten. A side where love wasn't defined by wealth, power, or social standing. Love, he realized, was about connection. It was about finding someone who saw you for who you truly were, not who the world thought you should be. And Emily had done just that. She had seen him, not as the billionaire CEO, not as the man with the world at his feet, but as a person who was just as vulnerable, just as broken, and just as human as anyone else. For the first time in a long while, Nicholas felt truly seen. He took a deep breath, making a decision. It was time to confront the truth, both about his feelings for Emily and about the life he had built. The next day, as he entered the office, he was determined to take charge of his own life. No more pretending, no more playing by the rules that had been set for him. He had spent so much time trying to fit into a mold that didn't suit him, trying to live up to expectations that weren't his own. But now, he was ready to break free. The first step was to have an honest conversation with Emily. He had to make it clear to her that he didn't want to live in the shadow of his past anymore. He didn't want to be controlled by the people around him, and he certainly didn't want to let anyone dictate who he could and couldn't love. Later that afternoon, Nicholas called Emily into his office. She arrived hesitantly, as though unsure of what to expect. But when she saw the expression on his face, she knew something had changed. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly, her voice full of concern. Nicholas looked at her for a long moment, feeling a mix of emotions swirl inside him. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, his voice steady but serious. "About everything. About you. About me. About this situation we're in." Emily's heart skipped a beat, unsure of what he was getting at. Was he about to tell her that it was all just a temporary thing? That he was going back to his life, his world, and she would remain a distant memory? But no, that was not the look in his eyes. "I realize that I've been living my life based on other people's expectations," Nicholas continued. "And I've been letting those expectations cloud what's important. And what's important, Emily, is you." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had heard him speak kindly to her before, but there was something different in his voice now. It was more than just affection. It was a promise, a commitment. "I don't want to be with anyone else," Nicholas continued, his words firm and unwavering. "I want to be with you, Emily. I want to build a life with you, a life that's real. One where we don't have to hide or pretend to be something we're not." Emily's eyes filled with tears as she listened to him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never expected this. Never expected him to stand up for their relationship. Never expected him to choose her over the life he had always known. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, but also everything she had feared. Could this be happening? Could a man like Nicholas choose a woman like her? She took a deep breath, finding her voice at last. "But what about your family?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What about the people who expect you to live up to all of these standards?" Nicholas shook his head. "It doesn't matter anymore. The only thing that matters is what's in my heart." For the first time in their relationship, Emily saw the man she had always believed him to be. The man who was willing to break free from the chains of his past and embrace the future with her. And in that moment, Emily knew that this was the turning point. This was the moment when everything changed. Nicholas had seen the truth, and now, so had she. The truth was that love wasn't about status or wealth. It was about the connection two people shared. And for the first time, Emily knew that she had found something real. As Nicholas sat in his office, his mind raced with thoughts of the future, of Emily, and the life they could build together. His heart was set on something different now. On her. The corporate world he had once been so enamored with, the status, the wealth, the pressure of living up to an image, all seemed so insignificant compared to the simple truth he had found in Emily. He had spent years playing by the rules of others, trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for him. But with her, it felt like the first time he was truly being himself. He had been uncertain for so long, struggling to break free from the expectations of his family, the board members, and his fiancée Isabella. But now, standing on the precipice of something new, Nicholas knew he couldn't turn back. He couldn't let the love he had for Emily slip away because of some misguided notion of what his life was supposed to be. That's when the idea hit him. A bold, daring move. Something that would shake everything up and prove not only to himself but to the entire world that he was in control of his own destiny. He wasn't just some rich CEO playing by the rules. He was a man capable of making his own choices, a man capable of following his heart. He needed to take action. Nicholas stood up abruptly, the decision clear in his mind. He was going to do something that would forever change the course of his life. He was going to show Emily and everyone else that their love was worth fighting for. But he knew it wouldn't be easy. The challenges they would face, the obstacles they would have to overcome, none of that was going to be simple. Yet Nicholas was no stranger to obstacles. He had faced adversity in his business life countless times, but this was different. This was personal. His heart raced as he dialed the number for his private jet service. He needed to act fast. The plan was forming in his mind, but time was of the essence. Emily couldn't wait forever. She had already been patient with him, forgiving him for his indecision and his wavering heart. He couldn't risk losing her now, not when he knew she was the one for him. After making the arrangements, Nicholas set to work. He called his assistant, giving her instructions for the next few days. There was no time to waste. Every second counted. He would leave for the airport first thing in the morning and fly to the one place that held the key to proving his commitment to Emily. The next day, he boarded the plane, his nerves tingling with anticipation. He was doing something that felt almost reckless but necessary. He did not doubt that it would be worth it in the end. As the plane touched down in the small, quiet town, Nicholas felt a surge of emotion. This was the place where he first truly saw Emily for who she was. It was a place where his life had taken a turn he hadn't expected. It was a place that symbolized the change he had been yearning for. The town was far from the glamorous world he was accustomed to, but that was exactly why he was here. The superficiality of his previous life seemed so distant now. Here, in this small town, he could finally breathe. As he arrived at the modest apartment complex where Emily lived, Nicholas felt a lump form in his throat. It was hard to reconcile the woman he loved with the life she had built for herself. It was a life of simplicity, but one that was filled with dignity and grace. A stark contrast to the high society world he was born into. Yet it was everything he had come to cherish in Emily. He rang the doorbell, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment that would define everything. When Emily opened the door, she seemed surprised to see him standing there. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Nicholas took a step forward, his gaze locked with hers. There was a vulnerability in her eyes, a hesitance, but also a deep love. "Nicholas, what are you doing here?" Emily asked softly, her voice a mix of confusion and curiosity. Nicholas smiled, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I've come to make things right, Emily. I've come to prove to you that I'm ready. I'm ready to be with you. No more pretending, no more hiding. What I'm asking for is not just another chance. It's a future with you." Emily's heart fluttered at his words, but she hesitated. "I don't want to be a part of your world of expectations, Nicholas. You have a life there, people who depend on you. I don't care about any of that anymore, he interrupted, his voice firm. I care about you. And I want you to be a part of my life. A real life. No more games, no more pretending. Just us. Together. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she looked at him, taking in the sincerity in his voice. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future with him. Nicholas stepped closer, taking her hands in his. Emily, I know this won't be easy. There will be challenges, and there will be people who don't understand. But I'm willing to fight for us, fight for you. Will you let me? Emily's breath caught in her throat, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always been afraid to hope, afraid that the world would never allow someone like her to be with someone like him. But now, standing before him, she saw the man he had become. She saw the love in his eyes, the commitment in his words, and for the first time, she believed. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Yes, I'll be with you, but only if you promise me one thing. Nicholas nodded eagerly. Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, you'll stay true to yourself. You'll always remember who you are, not who others want you to be, she said, her voice trembling. Nicholas gently cupped her face in his hands, his eyes filled with tenderness. I promise, Emily. I promise to always be true to you, and myself. It was in that moment, in that quiet, intimate space, that everything changed. Nicholas had made his bold move, and it had paid off. The future was uncertain and filled with obstacles they would have to face together. But for the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. With Emily, the woman he loved, and nothing else mattered. Not the wealth, not the expectations, not the judgment of others. Only the truth of their love. Together they would build a future, no matter how challenging it may be. Nicholas stood in front of Emily, the weight of the moment pressing on him. He had thought about this day for a long time, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure how to begin. The world around him felt as though it had faded away, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of pure emotion. The months they had spent together, the moments they had shared, and the deep connection they had formed, all of it had led to this point. But it wasn't just a moment of love. It was a decision, a choice to move forward, together. Nicholas had been through a transformation. He was no longer the man who sought approval from his family or sought validation from the wealth he had inherited. He had discarded the labels of the successful CEO, the heir to a multi-million-dollar empire, and the man who had been chasing empty pursuits. He had seen the truth in Emily's eyes, felt the genuine love and care she gave him, and realized that this was what mattered most. As he looked at her, standing there with an open heart, he knew that this was the woman he was meant to be with. A future with her was worth far more than anything his wealth could offer. Emily, Nicholas began, his voice soft but filled with conviction. You've changed everything for me. You've shown me a life I never knew existed, one that's real, raw, and meaningful. You've made me see that money and status don't define a person. What truly matters is love, loyalty, and being true to oneself. He paused, watching her reaction, knowing that every word mattered. Emily's eyes welled up with emotion, her heart touched by his words. She had always known Nicholas was different from the others in his world, but hearing him express his feelings so openly made her realize just how much he had changed. The transformation she had seen in him wasn't just about the way he treated her. It was about the way he viewed life, about the way he valued what was truly important. Nicholas continued, his eyes never leaving hers. I don't need to offer you diamonds or lavish gifts to prove my love. I don't need to buy your affection or try to impress you with wealth. I just want to show you that I am committed to you, to us, in a way that's real. I want to create a life with you, one that is built on honesty, respect, and love. And I want you to be a part of that life, no matter what anyone else thinks or says. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. She had always wondered if someone like Nicholas, someone who had everything, could ever truly understand the struggles she faced. But here he was, standing in front of her, offering something she never expected, a proposal that wasn't about money, status, or the superficialities of their worlds. It was about something deeper, something more authentic. It was about love. "Nicholas," Emily whispered, her voice shaky with emotion. "I don't need anything from you. I never did. All I ever wanted was your heart, your trust, and the promise that you would never forget who you are." Nicholas smiled, his heart swelling with love for her. He had never known anyone who could see through the facade he had built so easily. Emily had always seen the real him, the man he was beneath the suit and the wealth. And now, standing before her, he realized that it was only with her that he could truly be himself. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant ring. It wasn't a grand diamond. It wasn't flashy or extravagant. It was a small, delicate band, a symbol of something deeper. "Emily," he said, kneeling in front of her, "I'm not offering you a life filled with material things. I'm offering you my heart, my soul, and my commitment. Will you marry me, not because of who I am or what I have, but because of the love we share and the future we can build together?" Tears streamed down Emily's face as she looked at him, overcome with emotion. She had never imagined this moment would come. Not in a million years. But here it was. A proposal that wasn't about wealth or status, but about love. Real love. She took a step forward, her hands trembling as she reached out to him. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of conviction. "Yes, I'll marry you. I've always loved you, not for your money or your title, but for the man you are. And I want to spend my life with you, building something real." Nicholas stood up, taking her in his arms, the weight of the moment settling on both of them. This wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't about a prince and a princess. It was about two people who had found each other in the chaos of life and decided that love was worth fighting for. And as they held each other, Nicholas knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one that didn't rely on wealth or titles, but on the strength of their bond and the love they shared. For the first time, he understood what true wealth was. It wasn't in the bank account or the luxury cars. It was in the heart, in the promise of a future together, and in the simple, yet profound connection they had built. As they walked away hand in hand, Nicholas knew that the life ahead of them wouldn't be easy. They would face challenges, and the road wouldn't always be smooth. But one thing was certain, with Emily by his side, they could face anything. The proposal wasn't just a promise to marry. It was a promise to stay true to each other, to never let go of what truly mattered, and to always cherish the love that had brought them together. In that moment, Nicholas felt a sense of peace he had never known before. He had found what he had been searching for all his life. And now, with Emily, he knew that the future held nothing but possibilities. Possibilities built on love, trust, and the unwavering belief that together they could overcome anything. This was a proposal that wasn't about money. It was about the most valuable thing of all, love. The news of Nicholas's proposal spread like wildfire. It wasn't just a regular headline. It wasn't just a story about love or a man and a woman embarking on a new journey. No. This was a tale that shook the very foundations of high society. The world was watching. The world had opinions. And, as expected, the world wasn't kind. From the moment the engagement was announced, the media storm began. The tabloids went into overdrive, dissecting every detail of the couple's story, every aspect of their lives. The narrative they spun was one of scandal, of rebellion against societal norms, and of the unthinkable of marrying the unworthy. The rich, the famous, the influential. All of them had something to say about Nicholas's decision to marry Emily, the woman who had once cleaned the floors of his office. It was hard to ignore the weight of the words that followed. People questioned his sanity, his motives, and, most cruelly, his taste. The press painted Emily as nothing more than a gold digger who had somehow manipulated a wealthy man into marrying her. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire CEO ditches fiancée for Maid." Is love enough, or did money win the game? And the rebellious heiress, a Cinderella story or a stage scam? The world of social media was no better. The comments flooded in from all directions. Some cheered for the couple, praising Nicholas for his bold decision to defy tradition and pursue love above all else. Others, however, couldn't hide their judgment. She's just a cleaning lady. How could he be so foolish? What happened to class and status? Why settle for less when you can have it all? Nicholas must be having a midlife crisis to make such a ridiculous choice. The online platforms were filled with debates, arguments, and accusations. Even so-called friends of the couple weighed in, offering unsolicited opinions. Nicholas's business associates were quick to comment, some expressing their disapproval in private, others publicly voicing their concerns. Some claimed he was ruining his reputation, and others suggested that his decision to marry Emily would irreparably harm his business empire. His fiancée, Claire, was not one to remain silent either. After all, she had been the woman by his side for years, the one everyone expected him to marry. Their breakup had been the talk of the town, and now, seeing him propose to a woman she considered beneath him was nothing short of a slap in the face. Claire went on several talk shows, pouring her heart out, expressing how she had been betrayed by Nicholas's actions. She called him impulsive and naive, and said he was making a huge mistake. "What he's doing is unthinkable," Claire said in an interview. "He's risking everything for a woman who doesn't belong in his world. This is a scandal that will haunt him forever." The backlash wasn't just from strangers, it was personal. Nicholas's own family was in an uproar. His parents, who had always expected him to follow in their footsteps and marry someone of his stature, were disappointed and angry. They felt humiliated by his actions. His mother, who had always envisioned her son marrying into a family of equal or greater wealth, was beside herself. "You're throwing away your future," she told him, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You're making a fool of yourself." His father, a successful businessman himself, shared the same sentiments. "You can't possibly be serious, Nicholas," he warned. "This woman is a distraction. You can't let your emotions cloud your judgment. You're throwing away everything we've worked for." The pressure was mounting. Nicholas couldn't escape the whirlwind of judgment, criticism, and whispers behind his back. Everywhere he went, people stared. Friends who had once looked up to him now seemed to view him with a sense of pity. His colleagues at the office were no longer congratulating him on his engagement. Instead, they were gossiping behind closed doors, wondering if Nicholas had made a rash decision. During the chaos, Emily found herself caught in the storm as well. She had never anticipated this kind of attention. She had always been a quiet, reserved woman, someone who preferred to stay out of the spotlight. Now, she was thrust into the center of a media frenzy. The harsh words from the press hurt her deeply. She was described as beneath Nicholas, as someone who had no place in his world. The comparisons to gold diggers and opportunists were painful. Emily had worked hard for everything she had, and yet, here she was, being reduced to a stereotype. As much as she tried to ignore the noise, it was impossible to escape. The pressure from the media, the constant judgment from others, and the never-ending speculation took a toll on her. She began to doubt herself. Was this the life she wanted? Was she strong enough to endure the scrutiny that came with being in a relationship with someone like Nicholas? But Nicholas wasn't one to back down. He was resolute in his decision to stand by Emily's side, no matter the cost. The attacks didn't faze him. He knew what he had with her was real, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that away from him. He had seen the truth in her eyes, the same truth he had seen from the moment they met. She was genuine, kind-hearted, and had a spirit that no amount of wealth or status could ever match. Nicholas made it clear that he wasn't going to let the world's opinion dictate his life. "I don't care what they say," he told Emily, holding her hands firmly in his. "This is my life, and I'm living it with you. No one else's opinion matters." The media storm raged on, but the couple stood strong, united against the world's judgments. They knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, and they would face many more challenges. But as they walked hand in hand, they realized that this was the price of true love. It wasn't about perfection, and it wasn't about meeting society's expectations. It was about staying true to what they believed in, no matter the consequences. In the end, they would face the storm together. because they knew that the love they shared was worth every bit of the world's reaction. This was just the beginning of their journey. A journey that, no matter how difficult, they would walk together, side by side. Elena stood by the window, looking out at the city lights below. The night was calm, but her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Everything had changed in a matter of weeks. Once a simple cleaning lady, she had found herself entangled in the life of Nicholas, a man who seemed to have everything: wealth, power, and success. Yet, in his eyes, Elena had something far more valuable. She had love. But love was complicated. Elena had always been content with her simple life. She found peace in the quiet routine of her work, the satisfaction of a hard day's labor, and the joy of small, everyday victories. But now, her world had been turned upside down. Nicholas, with his grand gestures and unwavering devotion, had swept her off her feet. The proposal, the media storm, and the intense scrutiny that followed had all happened so fast. She had tried to keep up, but every moment felt like a test. Elena knew she wasn't ready for this life. She had never imagined being in the spotlight, being the center of attention. But here she was, thrust into a world of wealth, status, and expectations she didn't fully understand. The pressure was mounting, and she could feel it in every corner of her life. The media, the public, and even Nicholas's own family, all of them were watching, judging, and questioning her place in his world. Could she fit in? Could she stand up to the scrutiny and the harsh criticisms? Or was she destined to be an outsider in a world that was not her own? Elena had always been an introvert. She was quiet, reserved, and kept her thoughts to herself. But now, with the eyes of the world on her, she found herself questioning every action, every word, and every decision. Was she strong enough for this life? The thought of being in the public eye terrified her. The thought of attending high society events and rubbing elbows with billionaires and celebrities made her feel like a fish out of water. She had never been interested in fame or wealth. All she wanted was a simple, quiet life, one where she could love and be loved without the pressure of constant judgment. But now, it seemed that the universe had other plans. Nicholas had given her everything: his love, his trust, and his unwavering support. He had chosen her over his fiancée, Claire, and even over the expectations of his family. But was that enough? Could Elena truly accept this life, with all its complexities and challenges? She looked down at her hand, the engagement ring sparkling in the soft light. It was beautiful, yes, but it also felt like a weight, a symbol of the life she was about to step into. A life that was as glamorous as it was overwhelming. Elena had always dreamed of a simple life, but now she was faced with a decision that could change everything. Could she continue living in the shadows, avoiding the spotlight and staying true to herself? Or would she have to give in to the world of wealth and power, to the constant eyes of the public, and the expectations of those around her? Nicholas had done everything to prove his love for her, but was it enough for Elena to overcome her doubts and fears? She could feel the walls closing in on her. The pressure from the media, the judgment from Nicholas's family, and the constant comparisons to Claire were taking a toll on her. Every step she took felt like a step further away from the woman she had once been. She didn't want to lose herself in this new world, but she feared that was exactly what was happening. As the days passed, Elena withdrew further into herself. She stopped answering calls from friends, stopped responding to messages, and even avoided speaking to Nicholas about her feelings. She didn't want to burden him with her doubts. He had already sacrificed so much for her, and she didn't want to be the one to pull him back into the chaos of his old life. But deep down, she knew that she couldn't keep running away from the truth. She had to face her fears head-on. One evening, as she sat alone in the quiet of the apartment, Nicholas walked in, his eyes filled with concern. He had been trying to reach her for days, but she had been distant. "Elena," he said softly, sitting beside her. "We need to talk." Elena turned away, trying to hide the tears that had begun to form in her eyes. She had never been good at hiding her emotions, but she didn't want him to see her this way. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. I don't know if I'm strong enough to live this life. Nicholas reached out and gently took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. You don't have to do it alone, he said, his voice steady. I'm here, and I'll be here every step of the way. If you need time, we can take time. If you need space, you can have space. But don't shut me out. We can figure this out together. His words were simple, but they were exactly what Elena needed to hear. She had spent so much time doubting herself and questioning her place in his world. But in that moment, she realized that it wasn't about fitting into his world. It was about finding a place where both of them could be themselves, together. Elena took a deep breath and looked into his eyes. She could see the love and the trust in them, and for the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace. I want to try, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to be with you, Nicholas. I want to face this life with you, but I'm scared. I don't know if I can handle everything. Nicholas smiled, his eyes softening with affection. You don't have to handle everything alone. We'll take it one day at a time, and we'll face whatever comes our way together. That's what love is about, Elena. It's about supporting each other, no matter what. Elena nodded, feeling the weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe. She had found the strength to face her fears, to accept this life, and to embrace the love that had changed everything. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be worth it. With Nicholas by her side, she knew that she could face anything. They were in this together, and that was all that mattered. The final test wasn't about whether she could accept this life. It was about whether she could accept the love that came with it. And in that moment, Elena realized that she already had. The day of the wedding had finally arrived, but it wasn't what anyone had expected. The grand ballroom was filled with sparkling chandeliers, white roses lining the aisles, and the soft hum of classical music filling the air. The guests had arrived, dressed in their finest, all of them eager to witness the union of Nicholas and Elena. The world had been buzzing for months about this moment, the fairy tale romance of the wealthy CEO and the humble cleaning lady who had captured his heart. The media had followed every step of their relationship, from the scandalous affair with the fiancé to the media frenzy that ensued. This was supposed to be a story for the ages, a love story for the books, a wedding that would be talked about for years. But there was an unmistakable tension in the air. Elena stood backstage, her heart racing as she clutched the fabric of her dress. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She had come a long way from the quiet maid who had never imagined herself in a situation like this. But now, with all the eyes on her, she felt more uncertain than ever. The last few months had been a whirlwind. There had been love, yes, but there had also been doubts, fears, and misunderstandings. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this kind of life, the wealth, the attention, the constant spotlight. The expectations were suffocating, and every decision seemed like a test. Nicholas had tried to ease her worries, but in her heart, Elena still questioned if she was enough for him. Could she truly be the woman he needed, the woman the world expected her to be? Or would she fall short, unable to live up to the image of perfection that everyone had painted for her? She had faced so many challenges since their relationship had become public. Criticism from the media, judgment from Nicholas's family, and comparisons to his former fiancée, Claire. Elena had never sought the limelight, and now it felt like she was being forced to walk into a world she didn't understand. The nerves were overwhelming. But then, just as she was about to step onto the aisle, Nicholas appeared in the doorway. His gaze was steady, his face calm. But there was a vulnerability in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. He wasn't the confident, charming billionaire that the world saw. He was just a man. Her man. Who had fallen in love with a woman who wasn't ready for this life. Elena, he said softly, his voice warm and reassuring. You don't have to do this if you're not ready. I won't force you. We can walk away together, leave all of this behind, and start fresh. I want you. Not the ceremony, not the wedding. I just want you. His words were simple, but they struck a chord deep within her. Elena had always been afraid of the expectations, of the world that came with being with him. But in this moment, she realized that love wasn't about the grand gestures or the approval of others. It was about two people coming together, standing side by side, and facing whatever life threw at them. The wedding had become more than just an event. It had become a test of their love, a test of their commitment to each other. "I'm not sure if I can do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This life, this world, it's so different from what I've known. I don't know if I'm enough for you, if I'm enough for them." Nicholas smiled softly, his hand reaching for hers. "Elena, you've always been enough. You've always been more than enough. You've already proven that to me. You don't have to fit into anyone's mold. Just be yourself, and that's all I'll ever need." Elena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words sink in. She had spent so much time doubting herself, but at that moment, she realized that she didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to be honest with herself and with him. The world could wait. They had already been through so much together, and this moment, this wedding, wasn't about anyone else. It was about their love, their journey, and the future they would build together. With a final glance at Nicholas, Elena nodded. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady and confident. "Let's do this." The doors to the grand ballroom opened and the music swelled as Elena stepped into the spotlight. The guests were already seated, their eyes fixed on her. But for the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like she belonged. She walked down the aisle slowly, taking in the faces of the people who had watched their love story unfold. Some of them were smiling, others were skeptical, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was Nicholas. When she reached the altar, Nicholas took her hands in his. His gaze was soft, filled with love and warmth. "Elena," he whispered, "this is it. We're not perfect, but we're perfect for each other, and that's all that matters." Elena smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never been one for grand weddings or extravagant ceremonies, but at this moment, she knew that they didn't need any of that. They just needed each other. The ceremony was simple, but the love between them was undeniable. They exchanged vows that came from the heart, promises of love, support, and a lifetime together. The guests applauded, but Elena's world had narrowed to just Nicholas. The wedding was over, but their journey was just beginning. And as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, Elena knew that they had made the right choice. This wedding wasn't about the money, the expectations, or the lavish celebration. It was about two people who had found each other in a world full of chaos and uncertainty. It was about a love that had withstood the tests of time, distance, and judgment. And it was about the future they would create together, hand in hand, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The wedding wasn't what anyone had expected, but it was exactly what they needed. It was a symbol of their love, their strength, and their commitment to each other. A love that was real, raw, and unwavering. The world may have had its doubts, but Nicholas and Elena knew the truth. Their love was worth more than any grand gesture, any amount of wealth, or any public approval. It was theirs, and that was all that mattered. As the days passed after the wedding, life slowly settled into a rhythm. One that wasn't filled with the glitz and glamour of a fairy tale, but one that was grounded in real life, in love, and commitment. Nicholas and Elena had spent so many years amid a whirlwind of media attention, financial pressure, and societal expectations. The world had been watching them, waiting for them to fail. Yet here they were, stronger than ever. Their love story wasn't the perfect, polished kind you'd read about in romance novels, but it was real, raw, and undeniably theirs. In the beginning, Elena had been uncertain, unsure if she could ever truly fit into the world of wealth, power, and public scrutiny that Nicholas lived in. But over time, she had come to realize that it wasn't the money, the status, or the luxury that made their relationship special. It was the deep connection they shared, the understanding, the respect, and the unwavering support they had for one another. As they woke up every morning side by side, the weight of the world seemed to lessen. Nicholas, who had once been consumed by his duties as a CEO, now found himself prioritizing the happiness and peace of his home. Elena, who had spent so much of her life serving others, had found a sense of belonging, of being loved not for her role in the household, but for who she truly was. They were just two people, navigating life together, facing the challenges of the world as a team. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful in its own right. Elena had become more than just a maid in the eyes of the public. She was a woman of strength, of integrity, who had earned her place beside Nicholas not because of wealth or power, but because of love. Her quiet grace had become the backbone of their relationship, grounding Nicholas in ways he never thought possible. The media, despite all the scandals and public backlash, eventually moved on. The tabloids had found new stories to chase, new celebrities to scrutinize. What had once been their most vulnerable moment, their public humiliation, and the storm of criticism that followed, had faded into the background. Yet, despite the chaos of the outside world, their bond had only deepened. Elena was no longer the woman trying to live up to others' expectations. She was no longer apologetic for her past, her origins, or the choices she made. She was strong and confident, and most importantly, she was in control of her narrative. Meanwhile, Nicholas had learned to appreciate the simplicity of life. It was no longer about business deals, press conferences, or lavish events. It was about quiet moments together, cooking dinner in their modest kitchen, enjoying a glass of wine on the balcony, or simply lying in bed, talking about their dreams for the future. Both of them had come to realize that wealth, fame, and status weren't the measures of success in life. True success was finding peace, love, and fulfillment in the smallest, most ordinary moments. They had experienced so much heartache and struggle, but in the end, they had created something much more meaningful than any material possession. It was in the way Nicholas looked at Elena, the way his hand always sought hers when they were out in public. It was in the quiet, loving gestures they shared, holding hands as they walked through their garden, sharing laughter over morning coffee, and finding joy in each other's company. There was no need for grand displays of affection or extravagant gifts. The beauty of their relationship lay in the simplicity of being together, in the way they supported each other through life's ups and downs. They had both learned the hard way that love wasn't about perfection, and neither was life. Elena had accepted that she wasn't perfect, and neither was Nicholas. There had been moments when they had doubted each other, moments of fear and uncertainty. But they had worked through it, hand in hand, growing stronger with each challenge. Nicholas, for his part, had finally come to terms with his past. The pressure of being the perfect son, the perfect CEO, had often weighed heavily on his shoulders. He had been raised to believe that success was measured in power, influence, and wealth. But in the presence of Elena, he had learned that true success was finding someone who loved you for who you truly were, flaws and all. Together, they had built a life based on mutual respect and understanding, a partnership that had weathered the storms of public scrutiny, personal doubts, and family pressures. There were no fairy tale endings in the real world. There were no sweeping romantic gestures that could solve all problems or guarantee eternal happiness. Instead, true love was found in the quiet moments, in the day-to-day choices, and in the constant act of showing up for each other. Elena had found a place where she was accepted and loved, not because of the grandeur of her life, but because of the depth of her heart. And Nicholas had found a woman who could see through his wealth, his title, and his fame, who loved him for who he was, and not what he had. The world would never fully understand their story. The press would always look for the next scandal, the next headline to chase. But for Nicholas and Elena, that didn't matter. They had created their own world, one that was grounded in love, in shared dreams, and in the simple joys of life. And in this world, they were enough. The beauty of their relationship wasn't in the size of their mansion, or the number of zeros on their bank statements. It was in their hearts, their unwavering belief in each other, and their commitment to building a life together that was rooted in authenticity. As they stood side by side, watching the sunset from their balcony, Nicholas held Elena close, his arms wrapping around her protectively. They didn't need the world's approval. They didn't need validation from anyone else. They had each other. And that was enough. "I love you," Nicholas whispered, his voice full of emotion. "More than I ever thought possible." Elena smiled, resting her head on his chest. "I love you too," she replied, her voice steady and calm. "And I'm so glad we have this. Just us, together." They had come a long way from the early days of their relationship, from the doubts, the fears, and the judgment. But they had weathered the storms, and in the end, they had found something beautiful. A love that was real, a strong love, and a love that would last, no matter what the world threw at them. And as they stood together, the sun setting in the distance, they knew that their journey was far from over. It was only just beginning. As the story of Nicholas and Elena comes to a close, it's clear that their journey is filled with lessons that resonate far beyond the pages of this tale. Their love story wasn't just about a wealthy CEO and a humble maid. It was about breaking down barriers, overcoming obstacles, and choosing love over the pressures of wealth, status, and societal expectations. Their journey reminds us all that true love doesn't come with conditions, and that happiness is found not in material possessions, but in the people we choose to surround ourselves with. If you've been touched by their story, there's a reason for it. Love is not an easy journey. It requires vulnerability, trust, and the courage to be who you truly are. But if you're willing to put in the effort, the rewards are immeasurable. Just like Nicholas and Elena, you have the power to create your own love story, one that's filled with authenticity, respect, and true connection. And the best part is, you don't need wealth or fame to make it happen. All you need is the willingness to take a chance on someone who sees you for who you truly are. So, if you're inspired by this journey, ask yourself, what's stopping you from creating your own love story? Are you ready to break free from the fear of judgment and live authentically? Are you willing to take a leap of faith and trust in the love that's waiting for you? Remember, love is not just about finding the perfect person. It's about building a relationship grounded in mutual respect, understanding, and a willingness to grow together. Whether you're in a relationship now or waiting for the right one to come along, keep these lessons in mind. Don't settle for a relationship based on superficiality or societal pressure. Build a foundation that's built on trust, empathy, and shared dreams. As you move forward in your journey, remember Nicholas and Elena's story. Let it serve as a reminder that the most meaningful relationships are the ones that aren't perfect, but are real. And if you've ever wondered if true love is possible, yes, it is. It's all around us. It starts with the courage to believe in it and the willingness to give it a chance. If you're ready to take that step, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments. What part of Nicholas and Elena's story resonated with you the most? Are you ready to create your own love story? Or are you already living it? Let's keep this conversation going. Share your story, and let's inspire each other to build the kind of relationships that truly matter. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss an inspiring story like this one. Stay tuned for more amazing love stories that will remind you that anything is possible when you believe in love.